Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story of absolutely staggering resilience. We're tracking a multi-generational, multi-continental journey of one specific family, the Goiles. And this really isn't just a story about dates on a calendar or lines on a map. It's a deeply human saga. We're talking about migration, family, faith, and frankly, the extraordinary courage it takes to leave literally everything you know behind, not just once, mind you, but twice. I mean, just picture it for a second. What actually drives a family to cross the world, clear untamed land to build a life from absolute scratch, and then, after 14 years of incredibly hard-won progress, pack the whole thing up to do it a second time across another ocean? That is exactly what Heinrich and Johanna Goile did. By looking closely at their journey, we unlock a much larger understanding of the pioneer spirit and, really, the foundational sacrifices that built entire communities. To really grasp this, let's actually start closer to our present day. It's October 2010. A guy named Pastor Mark Whitfield is trekking up the beach highway on the New Zealand coast, making his way to St. Martin's Lutheran Church in Martin. He's literally following in the footsteps of his ancestors to celebrate the 150-year anniversary of their arrival. Mark is the great-great-great-grandson of Heinrich Goile. This walk really cements the incredibly high stakes of this legacy. The community the Goiles helped build isn't some forgotten relic. It is living history. And this timeline just brilliantly illustrates the sheer immense scale of Heinrich and Johanna's journey. Let's map this out to anchor ourselves geographically. Heinrich was born around 1818 in the Prussian province of Posen, which, for context, is in modern-day Western Poland. Fast forward to 1846, the family undertakes a massive migration to South Australia. Then in 1860, they uproot themselves yet again, eventually arriving in Martin, New Zealand. We're talking about 3 completely different countries, 2 oceans, and over 40 years of migration and settlement.
So, let's jump into Section 1, the first leap, leaving Prussia.
Okay, let's set the scene. By the mid-1840s, 28-year-old Heinrich and his 31-year-old wife Johanna had established a pretty solid life in Posen. They were part of a tight-knit Lutheran community and had 3 young kids, Friederike, Karl, and an infant named Bernhard. Now, we don't have a diary explaining exactly why they left, but in 1846 they made the monumental decision to leave their established community behind forever. They traveled to Bremen, Germany, and boarded a ship known as the Patel. A 19th century sea voyage was grueling enough on its own, but imagine 4 solid months trapped on a wooden ship with a baby. Their entire world contracted to just the sea around them, heading to a destination literally on the opposite side of the planet. Moving on to Section 2, the second beginning, 14 years in the Barossa. So, they arrive in Port Adelaide on October 28, 1846, and they build this fantastic life in the Barossa district. At the time, that area had really become a hub for German-speaking Lutheran migrants. Heinrich worked as a farmer and became an active, established resident. He even signed a petition regarding local administration in 1854. Meanwhile, Johanna is raising their growing family, adding 4 more kids to the mix during their time there. Australia truly became their home for 14 years. But life there came with some profound environmental challenges. The family initially lived in a settlement called Hoffnungsthal, which beautifully translates to the Valley of Hope. But in a pretty cruel twist of irony, the Valley of Hope was highly vulnerable to flooding and was completely devastated in the early 1850s. The settlement literally had to be abandoned, forcing the family to relocate. This environmental disaster was a massive hardship, and it really set the stage for their next major life decision. Which brings us to Section 3, the grueling trek, New Zealand, 1860. In 1860, the Goiles packed up their entire lives yet again. Joining a broader movement of German Lutheran families leaving South Australia, they arrived in Wellington. Curiously, it was on a mysteriously undocumented ship. Official records don't show the vessel, but their daughter, Louisa, who was 6 at the time, remembered its name decades later, the Peter Gottfried. Wellington, however, wasn't their final destination. The overland journey to the Martin district was just a chaotic, hazardous adventure. After Heinrich and his son scouted the land, the entire family moved north up the coastline in a trap pulled by 2 horses. The rivers were massive obstacles. They literally had to make the horses swim across, while the trap was carried over using canoes. Later on, they transferred to a bullock dray, which actually capsized while trying to cross the flooded Tutanui stream. Just a thoroughly frustrating wet end to an already exhausting trip. Now, you might be wondering, how do we actually know all these vivid, tactile details? I mean, official government documents definitely don't record a capsized bullock dray or horses swimming across a river. We only know this because that 6-year-old daughter, Louisa Maria Goile, survived into her 80s and published her memories in the Wanganui Chronicle in 1939. Without her, this incredible sensory storytelling would have completely vanished from history. And importantly, she explicitly recalled how local Maori provided absolutely crucial assistance to the travelers at those really dangerous river crossings. All right, Section 4, Building the Family Farm. When they finally arrived at what would become Pukapapa Road in Martin in May 1860, there was no farm waiting for them. None. It was just raw, undeveloped land covered in flax, toto, manuka, and thick bush. They had to carve a home right out of the wilderness. This was their third time starting from absolute scratch. Let's visually contrast their brutal early pioneer life with the thriving farm they eventually built. Their first house? A 4-roomed clay ware with a floor made of raw toto. They started with just a single cow and had to rely on wild pigs for meat, cutting their crops completely by hand. But over the years, that clay ware was replaced by a solid pit-sawn timber house. That single cow turned into a herd of 20 dairy cows, and their hand-cut fields evolved into a mechanized, established agricultural farm. To put this into perspective, let's just look at the number 5. As their dairy herd grew, butter became a vital product for them. Louisa remembered the family producing enough butter to send 5 50-pound barrels at a time to market. And to get it there, they had to load those incredibly heavy barrels onto a bullock dray for a grueling 3-day journey all the way to Wanganui. It's a perfect snapshot of the sheer physical weight of the work they did to turn a wild holding into a proper commercial livelihood. Section 5, The Unseen Pillars, Johanna's Legacy. You know, when looking at early settlements, it's incredibly tempting to view history strictly through the lens of one patriarch. After all, the land applications and naturalization records from the time usually only name Heinrich. The newspapers talk about Mr. Goile. But we really have to think about Johanna's crucial, largely unrecorded labor. She was, quite literally, the unseen pillar of this family's survival. She left her birthplace, traveled 4 months on a ship, raised 7 children across 3 entirely different continents, managed that humble 4-room clayware, and kept the family alive while the land was being cleared. Furthermore, when the other German settlers arrived, there was no church building yet, so they gathered right in the Goile home. The foundation of the local Lutheran church wasn't just Heinrich opening a door, it was Johanna managing her household, her living room, as the community's spiritual center. And their commitment to this new home was amazingly rapid. Less than a year after arriving, government documents officially marked their transition from migrants to established citizens. On May 3, 1861, Heinrich Goile was officially naturalized as a New Zealand citizen, described simply as a native of Prussia and a farmer residing in Rangitikei. New Zealand had definitively become home. Finally, Section 6, A Lasting Community Legacy. Let's bring this whole shebang full circle. The Goile family didn't just build a farm. They laid the roots for an entire permanent settlement along the Pukapapa line. The children who had crossed oceans with them grew up to be farmers right there in the district, establishing the next generation. And those early religious gatherings in Johanna's living room, they evolved into a permanent institution. By the 1870s, St. Martin's Lutheran Church was built, sitting right on land associated with Heinrich. That church stands to this very day. The congregation survives. And in this cemetery beside the church, there is a memorial stone marking the final resting place of both Heinrich and Johanna. So, which leaves us with this final thought. When we trace historical roots, are we just looking for names and dates on a dusty family tree? Or are we really searching for evidence of the incredible human resilience it actually takes to build a lasting community from the ground up? Heinrich and Johanna crossed oceans and started over time and again. Not for glory, but to forge a better future for the generations that followed. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this incredible story leaves you curious about the unseen pioneers in your own history.